I hope that everyone that watches the Highwire has now looked at enough science and had us talk about enough that you see how outrageous that is. I just want you to think about, as we look back, what we went through. This was a product that they decided should be forced on every single person in the world. You would lose a job here in America if you didn't take it. And the senior vice president of Pfizer's vaccine development department says, we don't really have an understanding of how this vaccine produces an immune response. We don't know how it works. We just know when we give this much, it seems to get a reaction. When we do that much, it gets a different reaction. I mean, I have said this. This is like children. The science around this is so speculative and based on assumptions and just like kids pouring Clorox and ammonia into a glass of water going, look what happens. And people start dropping like flies. Wow, it looks like it maybe kills people. I mean, this is what we're up to. So when you think back to all the discussions on 95% effective, we know it stays in the arm. It can't travel anywhere else. You didn't know anything. You didn't even know how it worked before you said, let's go ahead and take a gene therapy, turn it into a vaccine, not have any idea how it works, but it seems to be creating some antibodies somehow. And then the next question, how much protein is being produced? Because we're not injecting the protein the way we used to that would create the response. Now our cells are just going to start manufacturing the spike protein. How much are we going to get? Wow. I mean, you're getting a little out of line there. That's a really broad question for a time like this and a meeting like this. I mean, why should we have to answer that question? I don't know. Like the future of our species? This is what happened. This is what has been called science, and this is why I'm so excited about this show. I want to talk to an expert, a scientist, a doctor that grew up in this space and now has been writing with his writing partner, John Leake, about what he's discovering as he looks into the psyche and the egos and the ideology around all of this. And just when you thought it was safe to go home, when you could finally just go out whenever you want and not wear a mask, you know they need another crisis. Pharma needs another crisis. Is this it?
Authorities are currently monitoring a sudden surge of a virus in China.
The Chikungunya virus, carried by mosquitoes and starting to raise global concern.
About 240,000 chikungunya cases and 90 related deaths have been reported globally.
This painful mosquito-spread virus causes severe joint aches, fever, and fatigue.
This can lead to bleeding. It can affect the nervous system, the heart, the kidneys, and the liver. And in some cases, it can be fatal.
China is even bringing back COVID-like measures to try to contain the spread.
Authorities are also threatening to fine people up to $1,400 and even shut off their electricity if they don't follow the rules and empty any water from outdoor receptacles.
The United States has even issued a travel warning alerting Americans to stay away from the outbreak region.
There is no known cure for the virus, but there are 2 approved vaccines in the U.S., which the CDC is urging Americans traveling to China to get.
Of course there's a vaccine. I think they make these names up just to make, news reporters have to say it. Chikungunya. Well, I'm joined by the authors of Vaccines, Mythology, Ideology, and Reality. Of course, I'm talking about John Leake and Dr. Peter McCullough, who join me now. Peter, it's great to see you. John, it's a pleasure. Before I get into the book, I want to just get into the chikungunya thing really quickly. Is this serious? Is this a serious threat? What type of disease is this? What are we dealing with?
RNA virus carried by mosquitoes, Aedes mosquitoes, described in 1952.
So it's been here a while.
Paper by Ribeiro dos Santos, very important paper last year. 35 million annual cases.
Really?
So listen, a few 100,000 in China is not a big deal. I'm enormously suspicious that there's all this messaging about, severe restrictions in China just a few months after Bavarian Nordic launches the Chikungunya vaccine.
Wow.
It's almost as if it's vaccine marketing.
Right. Which, is actually a heart, it's a big part of this incredible book. And for people that, maybe wondering what you have here. This is a book that I said to you earlier, I wish I'd written it. And in many ways, it's all those stories. As you start investigating, where does this come from? How far back does this program go? Where did we start getting off track? Of course, you jumped in really in COVID. That was the moment you were on our show, I think it was in May of 21. Saying I'm seeing issues with this vaccine. I have some concerns. And at that point, you seemed still pretty stable with the childhood vaccine program. It seemed like COVID vaccine's a problem. I think the other vaccines, though, I don't want to hurt their reputation. I think we had an off-the-record conversation there just saying, I think you need to look at it. We've handed you some of our documents. You have come on an incredible journey. And in many ways, this is the perfect book. But just, Peter, what was the moment that you transitioned from COVID vaccine? What was the moment where you really, really started to turn on the childhood vaccine program and say, wait a second, something here isn't right?
2 inflection points. One, if we could have this madness well up worldwide over the COVID-19 vaccine campaign.
Yeah.
And then if we saw, which became now, I think, a looming existential crisis with autism and neuropsychiatric disorders, I did embark on inquiry. I previously had no strong views on vaccines. Most doctors don't.
Did you vaccinate yourself?
For sure.
Kids? Your own kids? Yep.
For sure. But I didn't have strong opinions one way or the other. I didn't feel like I was subscribing to an ideology.
Okay.
But as we investigated, we realized, wait a minute, the strong beliefs in vaccines, they'll go back centuries.
I love you guys teamed up. Of course, this isn't your first time. You've got Courage to Face COVID-19, which is a spectacular book. Behind the scenes, we talked about maybe turning it into a movie at some point. Maybe that's out in the future. I thought you did such a brilliant job of really showing the timeline of the COVID experience. But John, what I love that you bring to this is, you are such a great team because, we know we've got the science locked down. This guy can recite every single author of every study he's ever seen, this photographic memory, but your ability to research and I think see the human story in everything. Which so often these books can be very dry, and instead this is just a page turner, a historical journey through all of these milestone moments that are held up as the pinnacles of science, yet you show this underbelly that also exists there. Where does that research, where did that research take you? Like, where did you start, and what was like this journey for you?
Well, I studied history all my life and medical history, and what I have discovered is that these are stories. This is in many ways a love story. It's a sort of a love story of humankind falling in love with something that does seem to have a lot of promise.
Yeah.
The concept of taking a small amount of infectious disease causing matter, just a little bit of poison, it makes you just a little bit sick. And in the beginning, it was in the early 18th century with smallpox. And the idea is this seems to confer protection from severe illness. So I went back to the 18th century. There was this famous or infamous smallpox outbreak in Boston, Massachusetts. Yeah. And what I saw is straight away, there's this, we have it. We have the solution. We have the thing that's going to protect us and our children from this scourge. And a quick enthusiasm that is then followed by a lack of unbiased evaluation. So we understand, look, we all fall in love. Love is blind.
Right.
But the question is, are you seeing clearly what you've fallen in love with? And what we found for 300 years, mankind has pursued this love affair with vaccines without really any serious critical evaluation. And I mean none. The other thing that was amazing to me to discover is it's never really been a scientific enterprise. It has been largely driven by faith and ideology. And if you go back to the early 19th century, with the first smallpox vaccine, So remember, in the early 18th century, it's smallpox inoculation. It's actually using disease matter from a smallpox blister.
Okay.
It's when you get to the end of the 18th century that Edward Jenner has this idea that cowpox, which dairy maids seem to be contracting from the udders of dairy cattle, if you get cowpox, it seems to protect you from the far more serious smallpox. So I think this is very interesting, and I'll conclude this opener with this. So the word vaccine comes from the word cow, vacca, which is the Latin word for cow. So vaccine literally means of the cow.
And there's the tip of the hat to Jenner and this transition into this new way of looking at inoculation.
Correct. So what we're seeing is a very apt word, because as we've discovered, vaccines are the ultimate sacred cow. They really are.
They really are. And, you know, Brett Weinstein, who also was on this show very early on. I've talked to him since we've publicly come out, but we got in an argument in England over. I said, he was protecting the childhood vaccine program. I said, you haven't looked at it. You really don't know what you're discussing. And a year and a half later, he came up to me. It was one of the most chilling moments. And he said to me, I'm sorry. I didn't remember why. He said, you said I hadn't looked at the child vaccine program. And he said, well, now I have. And he said something that really stuck with me. He said, I wasn't stupid. I know vaccines are injuring. I mean, there was no way there was a medical product that doesn't have some injury. So I knew we were overly glossing over that, but I had accepted that. What I was shocked to find is that there is no science. Something that you two have both, is that as you, and so this book travels through time in many ways. It's fairly linear in that way, that bounces around a little bit, but you really just go through the different storylines and moments that this when it really became mandated and when they decided everyone needed to take it and all these things. But would you say that that's a fair assessment? Because people really still are completely offended when you try to bring up this topic. Writing a book about it, forget about getting a publisher. They don't want to go near this, right? Because you're challenging the science. Is it accurate to say there is no science?
Well, think about the underpinnings, the enormous fear. So we start out with Cotton Mather, a well-known Puritan minister. He watched several of his children die with measles.
Yeah.
Now, he takes up variolation for smallpox with Dr. Boylston and promulgates this. But think about Benjamin Franklin losing little Frankie to smallpox. Think about the unbelievable parental grief of losing children to infectious diseases, and then the hope that's presented in a vaccine. And now what you have is the ingredients. You have fear, then enormous hubris brought forward by these individuals. And we bring out Pasteur and others that say, it works, take it.
Yeah.
Okay. And money and power. So once you put that in a cauldron, then things start to take off. People were put in prison in the end of the 19th century for not taking the smallpox vaccine. You think it was bad during COVID.
Right.
You want to be somebody who's questioning the smallpox vaccine. And there were plenty of people. We give great credit to Roman Bastianic and Suzanne Humphreys in Dissolving Illusions to point out the fact that there were scientists of the day who were saying, wait a minute.
There were Peter McCulloughs then going,
yes.
Hold on a second, I'm looking at the science, it is lacking. We're lacking evidence that the results we're seeing are either being caused by this vaccine and I was sort of shocked. I think, was it in the book? I think you said that we'd had the smallpox vaccine for nearly 50 years and hadn't eradicated it, weren't even sure that it was working, and that's when they decided we need to mandate this. So that it's because everyone, because this is one of the things that I say when I speak in public, is I say, think about this product. Think as an entrepreneur. I said, I want to give credit to the greatest ad campaign that has ever been. This is a product that they've decided is unlike any other drug. I say, look at COVID. COVID, ultimately has a death rate of, less than 0.5%, depending on how you look at it. So 99.5% of humanity is not going to die from this thing. You could have had a drug for the 0.5%. How many are you going to sell there? Or a product that's slogan is, it only works if everyone takes it. And it can even be more extreme. Everybody but those that are so immune compromised, they'll be hurt by this disease. So all the healthy people in the world need to take it. That's the only way it works. Which product would you want to sell? The one that's for 0.5% or the one that 99.5% need to take? So what is it? Is it 1850 something there that idea comes about?
Parliament passed the Vaccine Act of 1853. There were successive iterations of that, strengthening the sanctions against people who didn't get their children vaccinated. But it's very similar to what we saw, eerily similar to what we saw during COVID. So Jenner's idea really catches on around 1801 as he publishes the 4th edition, revised edition of his pamphlet in London. And then Thomas Jefferson, Napoleon, George IV, some really eminent people in the world at the time embraced it, and they really embraced it. So by the time you get to 1853, the practice of vaccinating English children has been very, very widespread.
Right.
But the kingdom keeps getting hit with successive waves of small.
So it's not really looking at it from a historical perspective. It's not working.
So
stopping the outbreak.
So then you have people for 20 years put into jail or are fined if they don't get their. So everybody's getting vaccinated. Then you come to the year 1871. We've been doing this for 71 years in this realm, and the worst smallpox outbreak in history. So it was at that moment, it started in the industrial city of Leicester. Mm-hmm. They said, enough is enough. There's this insistence in England that all of our children get this, but it's clearly not working.
Yeah.
And we go into all of these quirks of smallpox. Something that a lot of people, I think, probably even, I would say the majority of medical doctors, they don't know this. Jenner, and nor did anyone else, in the entire 19th century, know the causative agent of smallpox. They had no idea.
Wow.
So it wasn't until the early 20th century with the advent...
But it hasn't... I just played the video, right? What you're getting to is the video I just played. We scraped some pus. We don't know what the agent is. We slap it in a cotton. It looks like it's working. We haven't evolved. We just watched the senior vice president of Pfizer say, we have no idea how this thing's working. We're injecting this amount. When we inject a little bit more, it's no different.
But it is no different. And this is the thing that astonished me. But I think there's a couple of fine points that I would like to put on this. So Jenner, in his pamphlets, he uses the word virus, and that's confused a lot of people. He's using it in the old Latin meaning, like literally going back to ancient Rome, means poison. So the idea is take a little poison. We don't know what the poison is. It seems to cause a contagion, an infectious disease that is spreadable from one person to the another. Give them a little bit of poison and that will protect them. Okay, so that's the only theory of a causative agent that anybody had until the very end of the 19th century with the early advent of virology, when people began to think, well, could this be something like a submicroscopic particle? But it gets even weirder. Okay, so after the advent of virology, Wyeth develops what many consider to be, this is, the final scientific narrowing down of the causative agent of smallpox. It's a virus, and we're going to call this smallpox vaccination, so I'll just back up. It was the discovery was smallpox is caused by a virus, and we'll go with the old Latin word for it, variola. Okay. Mm-hmm. But what is the vaccine? What is the cowpox that Jenner and his colleagues and throughout the 19th century, what is it? Like literally, what is it? Wyeth claimed, well, we've found the actual causative agent of cowpox. And Wyeth and I think other scientists agreed to this name. They called it vaccinia. So the vaccinia virus. Okay. But guys started doing serological studies, studies of what exactly is vaccinia in the vaccine. And what they discovered is we have no idea what it is.
Wow.
We don't know if this is the cowpox that Jenner and his colleagues in the 19th century claimed to be isolating and using as the original vaccine. So to this day, the whole thing is a mystery. And I'm sorry that was perhaps a bit technical, but the point is this. Your point with the FDA deliberative committee, the whole story is this. There is so much these guys don't know. In the 19th century, we don't even know the causative agent.
Yeah.
We don't even know what the vaccine is. But we're going to gamble anyway. And I think this is where Dr. McCullough, that was his original intuition, was this is gambling.
Essentially, as I've looked at this, and the more, of course, our nonprofit, we've sued for this information. If the government's sitting on it, we can't get it from the manufacturers. Where is the science? Where is the science that shows vaccines don't cause autism? You're making this statement all the time. Where is the science? How have you done this? And we just keep coming up with there's nothing there.
But Del, there's a history we've uncovered of fraudulent concealment. This is very important. Louis Pasteur proclaims a vaccine for waterfowl. He proclaims a vaccine for, an anthrax vaccine for animals. People say, well, where's the data? Where's the evidence? Well, it's kept under seal. I'm not showing it to you.
Right.
And then we realized...
Pfizer Moderna just tried to do that, saying these are trade secrets.
But this was Louis Pasteur. This went on for a very long time. And finally, in the 1960s, his family reveals the memoirs.
His lab books.
His lab books. I mean, this is astonishing. We even had a French scientist recently review our book. I said, were we unkind to Pasteur? He goes, no, you weren't. They created an institute over this guy. They worshipped him. And sure, there were good things that he did, but there was a tremendous amount of fraud.
Yeah, I mean, that amazed me. I mean, when I was a boy, Pasteur was one of my heroes.
Sure.
I mean, he's such an interesting, charismatic 19th century figure. And so, I was just astonished. I read this book by a guy named Geeson. Remember, it was published in 1995. And the title of the book is Princeton University Press, was The Private Science of Louis Pasteur. And so he had gotten access to Pasteur's lab notebooks, which were not made available to they weren't even he didn't even make them available to the French Academy of Science. They were totally private.
Wow.
And what's revealed is Pasteur, first of all, he was a horrible thief. There was a French veterinarian named Toussaint who kept making these brilliant observations about infectious diseases affecting animals, and then he would send samples of the bacterium in pure culture to Pasteur, and then Pasteur would then publish it as though it were his discovery. I mean, he was a real larcenist. But the other thing that he would do is he would just proclaim, well, I've created a vaccine for fowl cholera. It's like, all right. Great. So where is it? Well, we're still working on it. I will communicate with the Academy when I'm ready. But in the meantime, I have a very interesting vaccine against anthrax. It's a fascinating...
Self-promotion becomes
It's just amazing.
And media, really. I mean, they're using media and fear, with whatever techniques they have then. And over again. I mean, this book is so great. And by the way, it's what I love is you travel through time in an enjoyable, fairly quick manner, so that anyone that wants to understand the entire historical journey of all of these entities that really end up sort of proclaiming that this house of cards is the foundation of all science as we know it. In this journey, Peter, which has to have been somewhat shocking, because I think this is in many ways is the golden chalice of It's the monument of modern science. And I think where it's at, and I think that what I'd like to talk a little bit about is it all science? Do we distrust all science and all medicine as we see here? But this, to me, what makes vaccines different was everything else treats a problem. It treats, we can put a bone back together. We can do a surgery. We can cut a cancer out. We can always deal with something, and we're getting better and better at it. Vaccines is truly the God complex. We can make you stronger. We can make you a Superman that will not be affected by viruses. We're going to beat nature now. We're going to beat God, which is, you even in some of the interviews you see of Stanley Plotkin, of Paul Offit, they allude to this. They allude to the accepted casualty that's happening when they finally admit there's injury from vaccine. Well, yeah, but that's an accepted casualty of our war against nature. And it really, what you see is this desire for medicine to be godlike, and that's where it asserts itself. You're not allowed to challenge me. Is that true about all the science?
You know, godlike and also warlike. A lot of what you just said is also humans going to war.
Yeah.
And my last Senate testimony in May of 2025 in the U.S. Senate, I was the lead witness. There was no pushback about COVID-19 vaccines, injuries, and deaths. There was actually, I think, broad acceptance that the COVID vaccines have done great harm. But the contention was it saved lives. It saved lives. And so there's this thought among vaccinologists that there will be a collateral damage. There will be a cost for the betterment of society, and we just must accept that. So the question on the table, the ethical and moral dilemma that we find ourselves in, a perfectly healthy person, should they be sacrificed at the altar of the vaccines?
Yes. Good question. You know, and what is that number? That was one of the questions that I early on with Vax, as I was traveling, I ran into a person from the CDC up in, I think it was Washington, and she came to see me speak. I'm always impressed by that. You know, I'm glad you're here. It's like, well, I'm curious why you hate us so much. I was like, what do you mean by that? She's like, well, you just say bad things about science. I was like, no, I don't. What I say is I don't think you're being honest with the public. And I explained myself. I said, you have a mumps outbreak here. You and I both know that it's happening in a vaccinated community. And yet I'll turn on my news tonight and it's going to say that it's the anti-vaxxers that are causing this problem. And you as the CDC aren't stepping up to stop that. And she was kind of like, she's like, wow, that's fairly astute. And that is true. It is amongst the vaccinated. And I said, you know, ultimately, here's my problem. You know, do you believe that vaccines don't kill some people? And she's like, no, of course, there's no product that is perfectly safe and effective. I said, yeah, but this one, you say that it is. And then I said, okay, but so you are aware then, as a head of the CDC up here, that, you know, vaccines will kill some people. She says, yes, I understand the science. I said, okay, how many? How many is it going to kill this year? And she's like, well, I don't have that. I don't have those numbers. I don't know what those numbers are. I said, then how can you be involved in science? I said earlier in this conversation, you said it was an accepted casualty. You're telling me you're accepting a casualty, but you don't know what that casualty is. You know what that number is.
Del, I would contend it's not quantity dependent. We're talking about a healthy person without disease.
I agree with you.
One death with any vaccine should be unacceptable.
I agree.
But gentlemen, I mean, the military metaphor is very apt, though, because it's like, well, why do we send, I mean, so you take a mother and her relationship with her children. So my great-grandmother was widowed when my great-grandfather was killed in a train collision. She had 3 sons. That was all she had. All 3 were sent to war in the Second World War. At one time, all 3 of them were in action, and all of them were wounded. It's an interesting story. When they finally she'd held up during the war. When they finally all 3 came home still alive, she had a nervous breakdown. It's kind of interesting. But anyway, what we're told is those young men had to go. Good chance of them dying. A lot of their fellow soldiers did die. But to protect the broader public, the greater good in the United States. And so I think that military metaphor, and look, I mean, the vaccine makers themselves, I mean, they made a deal with the United States government in 1986 saying it's a strategic asset. It's a strategic public health asset. There's a certain percentage of children that will be injured or killed, but we're gonna have to accept that. And of course, the claim is it's a very, very small percentage. The question we're asking is, well, is it really so small?
Right.
And, you know, the bigger question here, I mean, I think some of this would be academic if it weren't for the specter of autism. I mean, that's the thing, when we start talking about, okay, you look at the timeline. I'm an old crime investigator. That's what we look at is suspicious timelines. With the proliferation of the vaccine, of the childhood schedule after 1986, when the vaccine manufacturers get liability protection.
We're at roughly 12 vaccines. Within years, we're at 54 vaccines.
Right. So look at the timeline of CDC detection of autism and the proliferation of shots on the schedule. It tracks almost lockstep. So that is extremely suspicious. So what we argue in the book is this should be investigated.
I agree.
And the lack of concern by the CDC and schools of public health across the world is shocking. So we have a tsunami of autism spectrum disorders, broadly neuropsychiatric disorders, including attention deficit hyperactivity disorders, seizures, tics. Exploding. No courses on this in schools of public health, no grand rounds at major medical centers on this. The CDC publications chronicling what is clearly a crisis. In the end, their conclusions are we should just prepare for more special needs services.
It's unreal. It's really unreal.
We talked about the military metaphor, the tribe binding together and sending its young, brave, valiant men to fight the bad guys. What do you see on the cover of the book? So that coin is a 20-euro silver coin issued by the Vatican.
Really?
Commemorating the COVID-19 vaccine and the Holy Father's endorsement of the vaccine. Now, observe that closely. So that tripartite figure is something that you see in Catholic iconography going back to like the Renaissance. Raphael painted a lot of paintings in that. So the Trinity, that could be the Virgin Mary, the Christ child, and St. John the Baptist. And the description in the Numistic catalog says a boy prepares to receive the vaccine. That grammar, that statement, and the number of words in that statement is identical to a communicant prepares to receive the Eucharist.
Sacrament, right.
It's brought, we highlight another image that we identified in the South Island of New Zealand. It's an old church, and a bright yellow banner is unfurled in front of the door. It says, "Not even the blood of Jesus Christ will save you from COVID-19. Get vaccinated."
And the word blood is in red, and the word vaccine is in red. So you see the equivalency, the blood of Christ, so this is this is tapping in to a religious archetype that's in the human mind. I mean, if you were to look at, you know, a philosopher, a psychologist like Carl Jung, he would say this is an archetype, it's always there. So when Bill Gates, in April of 2020, says, you know, we're all locked down, the world has been turned on its head, the only thing that will enable us to go back to normal is when every man, woman, and child in the world gets the vaccine. Now consider how remarkable that statement is. The vaccine hadn't even been developed yet. It hadn't even gone into trials yet. So it's almost like in the Gospels, you know, the advent of Christ. You know, fear not, I bring you tidings of great joy. You know, a child is born. Fear not, we will be able to go back to normal. The vaccine is coming.
Wow.
And it will liberate mankind.
Is that conscious? I mean, do you think that someone sits around and thinks like this, or is it just how we're wired? Are we mythological beings that write myth as we go along, and we just sort of naturally produce this type of rhetoric?
I think that Carl Jung was really onto something when he talked about archetypes. We're a storytelling animal. I mean, that's how we make sense. There are these recurring images: a savior, a liberator. And so I mean, Mr. Gates is a very strange man, so I would not hazard to guess what's going on in his mind. But that basic archetypal narrative of, the world, we're in big trouble, but something is coming.
We're going to save you.
And it's going to save us.
And remember, vaccines considered like a talisman. And vaccine acceptance, good. Vaccine hesitancy, bad. So these intellectual frameworks are set up. There's the Oxford vaccine hesitancy scale. So as if vaccine hesitancy itself is its own disease.
Right. That's what they said. I mean, I say in my talk back in, right there in 2019, vaccine hesitancy or the anti-vaxxers were a top 10 global health threat. The idea that you would be spreading the idea of not getting a vaccine or questioning a vaccine was a global health threat. And then they had a meeting moments later in Geneva, Switzerland, to discuss how to stop this new plague of vaccine hesitancy. We've watched this all along the way. As we wrap this, I want people to read this book. It's so beautifully documented. It's really a fun read, and it's great for everyone that wants to be able to tell these stories. Even I was like, oh, you've locked it down once again. You've reminded me, the details of these stories, because they really do help people understand that this didn't happen overnight. This didn't just happen during COVID. This has been a process that is repeated over and over and over again. But Peter, why? Why do this to your career? I mean, why get involved in something if you're right, if this mythology is so strong, if medicine is still locked in? We still have no apology from anyone in COVID. I don't see any doctors being retrained. I don't see an apology for the ventilators or the remdesivir or the lack of access to hydroxychloroquine or ivermectin studies now showing, and we're showing then certainly it's safe. We shouldn't be worrying, we should at least, if a doctor feels like it works, let's go with placebo effect. None of it was taken away from us. Just really horrific things. Your license, under review, jobs being pressured, yet you keep marching deeper and deeper into this. Why?
I recently lectured in Chautauqua, and so many dignitaries have lectured there, but I pointed out three important epics. One was the first great cocaine epidemic, 1860 to 1920. Doctors hooked on cocaine, nurses hooked on cocaine. It's in Coca-Cola. The doctors didn't correct themselves. The harm was just, Woodrow Wilson had to pull the plug, and in the UK they had to outlaw it. Then I said smoking, the big smoke fest. Doctors smoked. R.G.R. Reynolds, promotional campaigns with doctors. They promoted it to their patients. This went on from 1920 all the way to 1964. The doctors didn't police themselves. They didn't pull back on a giant safety concern when it was presented to them. And now we're into this great controversy with vaccines. And what we've uncovered, the harm from vaccines has gone back centuries. Sadly, I think we have a giant existential crisis of profound autism. We can just focus on that. Profound disabling autism and the great harm of the continued COVID-19 vaccine campaign. Thankfully, what's made the COVID vaccine less harmful to the population is people aren't taking it, despite every government in the world still having it on the market. No government has issued a safety report or an inspection. You can think about this mass global love affair, presumably with COVID-19 vaccines, and the nefarious, what we call biopharmaceutical complex, which has now learned if there can be enough fear and enough promotion of a new disease, the population can be concerned enough to trigger their governments to purchase vaccines. The key is to governments purchasing vaccines. They don't have to be used. The big vaccine companies make their money from the purchases of the vaccines not being used. We've seen this now with bird flu, with monkeypox, and probably chikungunya.
Del, if I could just make two final observations here. The first thing that I think is really important is that this love affair with vaccines began in the early 18th century when the conditions of life in our cities was completely different. And so
I love the whole story, by the way, the Thames River, and this was the big stink.
The Great Stink.
The Great Stink, they called it, where all of your sewage is running into the main waterway.
Which is
no one's paying attention until it gets to be 118 degrees, was it?
In the sun.
In London?
Yeah.
So, I mean, we could get into a global warming conversation that back in the 1800s they had a 118-degree day. But whatever, baked this, and the smell was so bad, finally someone said, maybe we should separate our sewage from our waterways.
Well, so I think this is an important point that I think is a poignant point. So in the early 18th century in Boston, I mean, there's no question that Cotton Mather was a very, very bright man. And I think a fascinating intellectual. He's probably the most important intellectual in the colonies at the time. Interestingly enough, he was a consulting theologian for the Salem witch trials, but undeniably a fascinating guy. Now, nobody understood what caused measles or what caused smallpox. It's suddenly just upon us, okay? Measles was far more virulent in the early 18th century than it became at the end. By the year 1963, with the introduction of the measles vaccine, it had become a far less virulent disease.
Before the vaccine got here, you just watched it just crash.
Right. So, we understand why Cotton Mather and other guys like him would be thinking, he watched 3 of his children die of measles. I mean, and he kept a diary, and we quote the diary in the book. It's heartbreaking to read. So what smallpox inoculation seemed to offer was hope. And hope is a very important thing in human affairs. So we understand and where this love affair came from.
Yeah.
In many ways, it was reasonable to fall in love with this. What we point out as we move along is, as the human mind becomes more and more mesmerized by this, it loses sight of the fact that there are many, many things going on towards the latter half of the 19th, beginning of the 20th century, that are causing this very dramatic decrease of infectious disease mortality. So that by the time you get to 1948, the beginning of the modern childhood vaccine schedule, with the DPT shot, infectious disease mortality had already plummeted in almost all of these diseases by over 90%, okay? And a lot of this is just common sense. I mean, better nutrition, better hygiene. Nutrition alone, in our era of over-calorie abundance, we forget that in the 19th century, the urban poor were oftentimes on the edge of starving.
Yeah.
So with better nutrition, hygiene, sanitation, clean drinking water, better housing, I mean, we take for granted that we have heat in the winter.
Right.
You're some Irish immigrant living in Hell's Kitchen in the 19th century, you're freezing.
Right.
Your little children are huddled together, trying to keep warm. So all of these conditions change. The standard of living is radically raised, and we're talking about tetanus, just farm boys wearing shoes.
Right.
Just shoes.
Wow.
So they're not stepping on sharp objects contaminated with cow manure. I mean, that's not high tech.
Right.
But we've forgotten all of that.
Because the story is just vaccines.
The story is...
All the credit is given to
all the
vaccines.
credit's given to vaccines. It's an incredible book. Before I lose you here, Peter, there's something you're talking a lot about right now. Patrick Soon-Shiong, the doctor, also owns LA Times, has been making some very terrifying statements about the virus, the spike protein. He says he believes this cancer epidemic we're seeing is the new epidemic of COVID, which is this virus appears to, be oncogenic. It's connecting to ACE2 receptors, enzymes through the body. He's talking about. You're talking a lot about this, both of you, and he's more careful than you are to say, and let's be aware that the vaccine is also creating the same spike protein with these same oncogenic abilities. But what I think is scary is for those of us that did avoid this vaccine, that did say I'm not going anywhere near it, you have said, I have patients that never got the vaccine that you just told me have a blood clot all the way down their leg, or you're seeing some of these issues. Number one, what do you think? Should we all go get tested? What should that test be? What do we do about it?
It's almost as if the entire world has been poisoned.
Okay.
Either with the infection, SARS-CoV-2, or with the vaccine, or both. Estimates are 97% of us got this illness. Remember, the presupposition was, let's lock down, let's wear masks, so some of us could avoid getting it.
Right.
Can you imagine if the proclamation was made early on? Listen, we're all going to get it.
Right.
Why bother locking down? Why bother wearing a mask?
Sure.
We're all going to get this illness. We need to get through it together. But the hitch was, and here's the virus here, the spike protein is the spine on the surface of the virus. The human coronavirus, we could get infected with these. The spike protein, we now know with very good investigation from the House Subcommittee investigations on the origins of this, it was engineered in the Wuhan Institute of Virology. It's not a naturally occurring protein. It has all kinds of features to it that we've never seen in medicine. Listen, I'm a cardiologist. I've been in practice for decades. I've never seen a protein that can cause heart damage, can erode blood vessels in the brain and directly cause brain hemorrhage, can cause blood clots, can incite autoimmunity where the body's immune system fights itself, and that turns off cancer surveillance systems to allow cancers to begin to accelerate into turbo cancer. I've never seen such a toxic protein in my life. It turns out we have evidence that those who had the infection have been exposed to this. Some actually have this in their body. And clearly those who took the vaccine have the entire length of the spike protein in large quantities. And now...
And keep dosing themselves with more and more and more, which is...
Very few people are, but but we have evidence, and with no funding. Remember, Health and Human Services, even with the new team, has no request for applications to investigate what the spike protein has done to the human body. The Biden administration spent $1 billion on long COVID. No spike protein projects. Don't look over here. There's a mass oblivion to the problem of the spike protein, but I can tell you, I have patients in my practice, and we're working with a research lab in Germany. We have evidence of Pfizer, Moderna physically in the human body, and spike protein being produced everywhere in the body, circulating in bloodstream 3.2 years after the shots. We can find it in biopsies in tissues. This is alarming. People should be alarmed that this messenger RNA has been synthetically altered through a process called pseudouridination. There's no known human enzymes that can break down the messenger RNA. The spike protein, no human enzymes known that can break it down. Fortunately, we have some natural products. We have convincing evidence, nattokinase, bromelain, probably others, sereptase, lumbokinase, papain, and others that can break it down. But let me tell you what, humanity could be in for an incredibly difficult time. If you look at mortality across the globe, clearly 2021 is going to be one of the worst years in history. Now, the American cancer statistics just came out. They're on Focal Point Substack. And, cancer overall is about the same, slightly down. But the ones that are advancing are the most common cancers. So in women, it's breast cancer, and in men, it's prostate cancer.
Wow. What test do you recommend if someone wants to find out? Because a lot of people are having issues with fatigue or wondering, there's just something's wrong. Do you recommend a test? Can you figure out if you've got circulating spike protein?
Right now, we have only indirect proxies. So the FDA has not allowed a single test on the market, and these are not hard tests, to directly measure spike protein in the bloodstream. That should be top of mind for the FDA and HHS, right? I mean, because we're trying to diagnostically figure out what's going on. However, we can measure antibodies against the spike protein offered by many companies, and the common labs, Quest and LabCorp, offer it. I think the leading manufacturer is Roche, making the Roche Alexis assay. This test ranges from less than 0.8, means you've never been exposed to it. Greater than 25,000 units means you potentially had a massive exposure. In multiple studies in my clinical practice, I've measured this in thousands of patients. Again, it's the quantitative spike protein antibody. Levels less than 1,000.
What am I asking for? When I go to Quest, would I say, I want a
COVID antibody test, and it'll give it against the nucleocapsid, so antibodies against the ball, that means you've been exposed to the virus, and against the spike protein. That's how much spike protein from the virus of the vaccine has stimulated your antibodies. But here's the point. Every paper so far, my clinical experience confirms this, quantitative antibodies less than 1,000, you're in good shape. I have no concerns about blood clots, heart damage, sudden cardiac arrest.
Okay.
Greater than 1,000, progressively higher risk. In my experience, over 5,000 on this, we're finding spike protein circulating in the bloodstream. That's a bad thing. There's not a single doctor in the world can say that having circulating Wuhan spike protein in the bloodstream is benign. It's not. Okay. It's dangerous and deleterious. I'm greatly concerned. We've published now and have 2 years of experience using detoxification with natural products, nattokinase, bromelain, and curcumin. Multiple studies, clinics all over the world using this. Others, Japanese, advancing even more enzymes. We need exogenous natural enzymes to be absorbed in the body, break down the spike protein, and let us clear it out.
Incredible. I want you guys to stick around for Off the Record. And one of the questions I want to ask these guys, Bobby Kennedy's under some heat. Yes, it looks like he's rolling back the mRNA technology, but he's getting behind this idea of a universal vaccine that somehow is going to be able to fight all illness. Is that just more of the same journey into the same hubris? I'm going to ask Peter and John if they think there's a decent vaccine that could ever be made. You're not going to miss the Off the Record. But the book is called Vaccines, Mythology, Ideology, and Reality. You want this book. It's a great book. It's a great book for your friends that are starting to ask about these questions, having questions about the vaccine program. This takes you on a ride, fairly easy read to get through it with the personal stories and this dream that they had.